everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Michael Corgett, and I am one of the AT&T focused advisors here at the Retirement Group, along with my partner, Patrick Ray. Welcome. These on-demand webinars are just one of the many resources that we have to offer individuals like yourself to help educate you and help you towards a comfortable retirement. We maintain a library of these webinars as well. We'll talk more about where you can find them. These webinars are just one of the many resources, as I mentioned. We also maintain a ebooks library that is filled with books on all sorts of different topics. We also have a newsletter and a blog that we maintain. You can find those either on our website or on our LinkedIn page. Reach out to our office and get your AT&T retirement guide. It's very helpful, very comprehensive. And then finally, our cash flow retirement kit, our retire kit. It's a very comprehensive snapshot of your current financial situation and what your potential retirement could look like, whether it's a month from now, a year from now, or 5 years from now. It's a complimentary service that we're happy to offer you. All you have to do is ask and give us the opportunity to put one together for you. We are not affiliated with AT&T, nor are we affiliated with Fidelity. We're an independent advisory firm. We're here to help you. And I want to go ahead and hand the presentation over to my partner, Patrick Ray. Patrick.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar series. My name is Patrick Ray. I'm one of the AT&T focused retirement advisors here with the Retirement Group, and we appreciate you spending some time with us today. Hopefully you'll find some value in what we have to talk about, and we have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Before I get into the presentation, let's talk a little bit about the Retirement Group in case you're not familiar with our company. We have a team of advisors across the country. Between Mike and I, we have over 50 years of experience, along with some of our other members, that brings some real value to the table when you're trying to plan for and make one of the most important financial decisions that you have to make. And so in order to lead into a successful retirement, one of the many tools, as Mike had covered at the beginning, that we have to bring to the table is these educational format webinar type series to provide you as much information and detail as possible. We have a specific knowledge of what's going on at AT&T from a retirement planning perspective, certainly from the pension side of things, along with your 401k and your healthcare benefits. And so we feel like there's no one better suited to help educate you on what's going on at the company aside from us with respect to your retirement planning needs. And maybe the thing you'll find the most value of is the complementary cash flow analysis that we have, which is an effective stress test of your overall financial and retirement planning needs to ensure that you're on track to meet your overall goals. And so if you're open to spending a few minutes with us, we're delighted to offer you and present this detailed formatted presentation to you so you have a better understanding of where you are in retirement in correlation to your goals and so forth. And so we'll talk at the end about how to get in touch with us if you're open to that. And if you're not already doing so, please feel free to copy this QR code on this page. This gives you access to our LinkedIn page, where we have a ton of up-to-date information related to what's going on at AT&T from a retirement perspective, along with maybe the most important thing, which we will talk about today, which is the interest rate environment and how that affects your pension. So speaking of the pension, that's what we're going to talk and focus most about today, because it happens to be one of the bigger sources of capital that most of you will rely upon at some given point in your lives if you're eligible for the plan at AT&T. So we're going to talk about the pension options. We're going to certainly cover service pension eligibility, which as it turns out, this is one of the biggest misunderstandings at that company for some reason. And so we want to make sure everyone is crystal clear on how that works. And then we're going to talk specifics about the interest rates, among other things. And so with respect to the options, first of all, from a non-management perspective, things are fairly straightforward. It's an effective defined benefit plan that considers and uses your pension band, which has to do with your compensation level, along with your years of service and your age. And so that calculation is fairly simple to follow through. And fortunately for you, just like for the managers, you're eligible and able to get onto the Fidelity website and calculate future earnings and things that would benefit or affect your pension going forward if you plan to retire next year or 3 years from now or 5 years from now and so forth. And so we'll talk for in just a moment about the interest rate and how you might consider that with your future calculations. But for the managers that are joining us this afternoon, there's a couple of moving parts. Some of them are frozen. Some of them are old plans that have been effectively upgraded, if you will, to a different version of what you would expect or what you will ultimately gain when you decide to leave the payroll. Each one of these things have specific benefits and drawbacks to them, but the best news about this entire circumstance is you don't have to tell AT&T which one of these things is the highest for you. By default, they're required to give this to you. So when you go to calculate your pension, which I'm confident many of you have done in the past, because if you haven't, we're delighted to walk you through this process on the Fidelity calculator. Basically, what you go into and project for values and as far as your pension is concerned will provide you with the highest number. So you don't have to go back and convince AT&T, for example, that because of your start date and your work history and your service and so forth, that the cash balance plan, for example, is your highest benefit. And so that often gets asked of us. But for what gets asked the most, probably the most misunderstood scenario at AT&T is the rule of modified 75. This is the eligibility requirement for you to gain access to retirement benefits, which include your pension values, of course. So if you have more than 30 years of service, regardless of if you're a manager or not, you are going to be automatically eligible for the retirement plans at AT&T. The catch comes when you don't hit the 30-year service mark and you're somewhere in between. So the most important thing of this slide is to share with you that you have to check both sides of the next three options. So in other words, you have to be at least 50 with at least 25 years of service, be at least 55 with at least 20 years of service, and then be at least 65 years of age with at least 10 years of service. You must fall into one of those three scenarios where you check both sides of the box. And so as an example, if you are 48 years old and you have 27 years of experience or work history at AT&T, those two numbers add up to 75, right? But that individual is not modified 75 because although they've checked the at least 25 years of service box, they do not check the 50 years of older or older box, which is a problem from a penalty perspective. And I'm going to talk about the penalties related to the pension plan here in just a moment. But part of the biggest concern is the expectation of what they will pay you based on how old you are. And this is one of the factors, among others, that are part of the pension calculation itself. And so when we have a person who is between 50 and 60 years of age, the life expectancy that they have is part of this overall calculation on what they ultimately give you as a pension benefit. And so the younger you are, the bigger your lump sum is going to be. The older that you are, the less the lump sum is going to be. And basically the reason for this, if you think about it, it kind of makes some sense, which is if you're younger, they need to push out a bigger check to you to otherwise have effectively replaced the monthly payments that they were going to give you for your life expectancy. So they would have to pay someone who's 51 more money than they would who that person is 61 as a comparison. And so that's why we put this slide in here to talk about just the difference in life expectancy, because it does have something to do with the calculation itself. But this is probably what affects the calculation the most, or certainly what drives the most relevant conversation, certainly that we're having with our folks today, because of the interest rate environment. And because the interest rates have an inverse relationship to your pension lump sum, you should know that when the interest rates go up, your pension values go down. And so we can equate this, if this is kind of hard to wrap your arms around, with borrowing money from a bank. And I'll give you a quick example. So if you have a budget of $1,500 for a mortgage payment that you go to do business with Bank A, and Bank A says, we'll give you a loan and we're going to charge you 6% for that loan. Your $1,500 payment will buy you a $300,000 home, okay? But if you go to Bank B and Bank B offers you a loan at 4.5%, your $1,500 mortgage payment will buy you a $367,000 home. So Bank A will allow you a lesser payment for a lesser house for the same amount of payment that you can afford, but Bank B will give you a broader scope of options that you can buy a bigger home. So in this example, part of the biggest concern that we have from most of the folks that we're talking to today, of course, as I'm confident most of you have heard, of the scuttlebutt related to what the interest rates are doing to your pension. And because this has an adverse relationship to your pension, there are many people who are considering leaving the payroll, even if it's prior to the planned retirement date that they had, to move on to a position at another company because it will allow them to maximize the pool of capital that they have in their pension value. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But this is what the interest rates look like. And what we've done here on the top half of this slide is give you a visual of the last 5 years of interest rate formulas. And so because the rate is calculated in November and it's good for the following year, the November 2017 rate was applicable for all parties who retired in 2018. And that rate was 2.2 in the first segment, 3.57 in the second segment, and 4.24 in the third segment. Just in case you don't know, the first segment deals with the first 5 years of your retirement. Segment 2 deals with years 6 through 20. And the third segment deals with year 21 plus. So typically the segment that has the biggest impact on your lump sum is the second segment, okay? So as you can see, over the years, over specifically the last 5 years, the rates had gone from a moderate number to, in 2020, what was the lowest number that it's been. And now for our 2022 retirees, you're into a number that has 1.02 for the first segment, 2.72 for the second segment, and 3.08 for the third segment. The significance of this is what's going to happen if you stay on the payroll past the 2020 year, the tax year of 2022. And so what you'll see is this is the July 2022 rate. First segment is 3.67, second segment is 4.67, and the third segment is 4.73. Now, I know, as maybe you don't, but you should, the rates only are applicable for what's calculated in November for the following year. However, these rates change every month. And so because these rates change every month, we keep a very close eye on these because we can have an anticipation on what the history so far this year has been as to the rates changing and what that might mean to you if you stick around for another year or 2 or 3 on the payroll. And so because our biggest concern for most of the folks that we talk to is the impact of what their lump sum is doing if they retire beyond 2022, it's because of this. So right now, these rates are up by 2.62% in the first segment, 1.95% in the second segment, and 1.65% in the third segment. And to give you some kind of general feedback, for every 1% of interest rate change, it affects your lump sum somewhere in the 10 to 12% range. So I'll give you a couple of examples that I've ran into recently here in just a moment to kind of give you some perspective, if you will, of some of your coworkers and what's happening in case you don't know how this applies to you. But this is a slide that shows the history of these interest rates. And much like the stock market, certainly for this tax year in 2022 for sure, but these things are all over the place. And unfortunately, we don't really have a way to gauge the future of what happens, except for we have a pretty good handle on what's transpired so far since we follow these rates every single month. And the perspective of what we've been able to put into context for people who are concerned about this is to help them do some calculations based on a comparison of this year versus, you call it next year, 2 years, 5 years from now, whatever the case may be for the normal retirement date for you or what you were thinking about, to give you some kind of example or understanding of the difference between those two numbers. And so as an example, I had recently a 52-year-old male who was service pension eligible, and his lump sum went from $787,000 in 2022 to $610,000 in 2023. So this individual, it cost him roughly $160,000 of lump sum pension value for the change between retiring in 2022 with the rates that have already been set from November of 2021, or pushing off his retirement until what he was thinking about, which was leaving the payroll next year. And so in this case, he was able to comprehend in a real life number what the difference is between either staying or leaving the company. Now, our job is not to convince you to leave the company if you certainly weren't otherwise planning on doing so. Our job is to educate you about what these differences are so that you can make the best decision for what you might feel is best for you and your family. And most of how you get and back into the right answer, if you will, on if you should actually take a right turn, even though you are considering going straight, is by running one of those cash flow analysis that we talked about at the beginning, which is an effective stress test of the difference between leaving today versus leaving next year, and what that might mean to your net worth over a 5 and 10 and 15 and 20-year window, and certainly during your life expectancy. Another example I ran into recently, I had a 57-year-old female who was considering leaving the company next year as well. And her number was fairly surprising to her. Her lump sum went from $656,000 down to $482,000. So in her case, she lost roughly $180,000 of pension value. And so the numbers are not set up to scare you in any way. But this is one of those things that if you look back going forward and say, if we knew then what we know now, it would have made maybe a difference as to what you were planning on or deciding to do. And so again, as we talked just a moment ago, our job is not to try to convince you to do one thing versus another, but more to educate you on these scenarios so that you have been armed with the best material and knowledge possible to say, this is something that benefits me, as opposed to, hearing one of your coworkers saying, oh, well, their advisor told them that they were going to lose $200,000 and they got to go, without really having a plan. I mean, that may be true. I mean, I've had a person who lost over $250,000 who had a $1.4 million pension. But the reality was he was ready to go. And so it seemed like it was an easier transition for him, as opposed to someone who was thinking their retirement is not going to happen for them 2 or 3 or 5 years out, or till their youngest kid is out of college, or the house is paid for, or some form of what we refer to as an anchoring event. And so just be mindful of those things. And so let's talk a little bit about the pension formulas. You've got a cash balance plan. Certainly when you log into Fidelity, for most of you, you're going to see a number on the first screen that you look at, and that's going to reflect what your cash balance plan is. But most of the time, that's not your highest pension value. And so you're going to rely on the CAM formula in most cases, especially if you are a Legacy S person. And we'll talk a little bit about the differences of those, as well as the forms of payment that you might otherwise consider. And so the two key caveats to the grandfather benefit, or the frozen cash balance plan, is the fact that they froze your compensation that gets put into this thing on January 1st of 2005, meaning that all the compensation that you've had on the payroll for the last 17 years is not going to count towards the value of this particular pension. The second most interesting part of this particular calculation is it applies to the 30-year treasury. And so we talked just a moment about the interest rates, and those are segmented rates, which are the corporate bond rates. And so these are two completely different sets of interest rates, which have two completely different impacts on the number that you'll see in your pension values. And so it would be nice in most cases, because the treasuries are typically lower than the corporate bond rates. The lower the rates, the more money you get. So in theory, this pension should be higher, but because they froze this compensation factor of what gets put into or deposited into this bucket as of January of 2005, this number is far and beyond the lowest pension value that you will have. Most of you will rely on this value, the CAM formula, which stands for career average minimum. And so there's some minimal eligibility requirements that most all of you that are here probably already have been passed. But basically, if you were hired prior to June 12th of 01, you were immediately eligible. And if you were hired after that and still eligible for a plan, you had a 3-year vesting schedule. But let's look into the actual formula, because something that has changed for this particular tax year moving forward, and some of your coworkers left the payroll last year as one of many reasons, is because of the future credits that you get. And so this shows you that you have an average pension compensation where they take your average salary from January 1st of 1995 to December 31st of 1999. Clearly, then you were making way less money in most cases than you are today. So it's ironic, obviously, that they use a lesser number to figure out this pension value, but they take your credit service of that average 5-year window as of December 31st of 1999. And then the key here is they add your total pension compensation from January 1st of 2000 until December 31st of 2021. So there's an effective 21-year cycle of total compensation. And by the way, if you haven't known this, when you do an illustration on Fidelity and you get to the part where it shows you all the numbers, in the middle of the screen, you can see something that talks about calculation pension details. And if you click on that, it brings you to about a 6 to 8 page PDF document, and it shows you this calculation. So you can actually see the numbers on how they come up with what the figure is that they're saying is your highest pension value by looking at that PDF calculator. And so the catch to this is they multiplied this adjusted career average income by 1.6%, which gives you the annual annuity. Now, I'm aware that they give you the lump sum, obviously. So there's a conversion factor that they take and divide into this annuity to tell you what the total lump sum amount would be. But what has changed is now that you're on the formula for 2022, because you're involved and on the payroll this particular tax year, that future credit for those new earnings is only 1%, which is about a 37% reduction from what it used to be. So this was one of the cutbacks that they made, that the company made by reducing their future, their future adjustment going forward for your new compensation. So it's kind of complicated, but sometimes what is more complicated is the discounts or the eligibility issue that we talked earlier about with being service pension eligible and how it technically applies to you. So many of you may have heard in the past that the ideal time frame for you to get to at AT&T is age 55 and be service pension eligible. And the main reason is because there's no more penalties on your pension plan if you reach age 55 and you are service pension eligible. Now, there's two different variables if you're not service pension eligible, but you could be and still fall into table A pension penalty. So it's possible that you don't meet the modified 75 rule, which would mean you'd be in something called table B pension penalties. But it's also possible to be service pension eligible and yet still have penalties on your pension plan, which lies some confusion for some of the folks that we talk to. And so the way this works is there's a table A version and a table B version. And so the table B version by far is the severe penalty route. In other words, this is saying that you're not service pension eligible, and the value that you ultimately end up with is roughly 20 to 30, in some cases 35% or so of what they otherwise would pay you. So getting to service eligibility is a massive step at this company because it gives you a big increase in your lump sum or in your pension values, of course. However, as I just mentioned, it's possible to move from table B to table A pension penalties, and of course, you still have penalties. So then the next question is, if you're under the age of 55, do you or do you not have 30 years of service? And so if you do not have 30 years of service, then the penalty is 0.5% per month, or what is an effective 6% per year discount. But if you have more than 30 years of service, that penalty gets cut in half. And so you'll go from having a 6% per year penalty to a 3% per year penalty. Some folks that we meet with go from table B pension penalties to no penalties because they're over age 55. And so there's quite a bit of confusion as to which penalty table that you fall into. And we're delighted to help walk you through which one of these things may be applicable depending on your circumstance. And so feel free to ask us about that if you have questions. Now, the forms of payment, of course, there's a single life version, which if you're not married and you don't have a spouse, that's your option to take a monthly check. And when you pass away or suffer an untimely death, those payments stop. There are a number of different joint options in case you are married, where you can have a 25, 50, 75, or 100% payout to your spouse. And of course, the more you ask the company to pay your spouse, the less they pay you while you're alive. Obviously, you can take the lump sum now. And by the way, this hasn't always been the case, because before, when people moved from the old cash balance plan and basically had the CAM formula as their highest pension values, one of the main triggering events to that was to force you to take a portion of your pension in a lump sum and another portion of your pension in an annuity payment. So that forced you to keep money at the company. And over the recent few years, they've given you the option to actually get a 100% value of your lump sum, assuming you're service eligible, and walk off the payroll as a retiree. So there are many forms of payment. And, we get asked often whether it's best for you to take the annuity payment versus the lump sum. And among other reasons, this is one of the beauties of running the cash flow analysis to compare the two side by side. So you have some reasonable understanding of the differences between the two and how it may apply to you in your given circumstance, depending on your need for income and your tolerance for risk and your financial goals and your retirement objectives and things like this. So the catch to this is the planning process is a problem for most of you. In fact, we know statistically that 74% of people over the age of 50 do not have a written financial plan. And there's really no reason for this because firms like ours do this as a way to introduce their services to you and try to develop a relationship with someone who's actually looking for a partner in retirement. So when you get to the point where you're considering working with an advisory group, or maybe you have a relationship with someone and you're considering getting a second opinion, you want to ask a few questions that might make a lot of sense to you as an AT&T employee. One of them is they understand what we just went through this afternoon with respect to the pension calculation and how it's applicable to you and your specific circumstance, and maybe the differences between leaving the payroll this year versus sticking around for 2 or 3 or 5 years from now. Also, you'd like to know that they understand your healthcare benefits and your 401k and all the things that are applicable to all of you as an eligible employee at AT&T. Clearly, you want to understand how these people get paid. Obviously, we do not work for free, and we have fiduciary responsibility to the folks that hire us, which, if you haven't heard that term before, you may want to know what that means, which means that we have your best interests at mind in all cases, at all times. And that's important also with respect to having a team that's involved to help you with the planning process and what's involved and what to expect. I think expectations are everything, frankly. And so if we can set some expectations for you to understand what the process is like and what's involved with the thousands of people that we've met with over the years, we feel really well suited to help you with this process, of course. And then maybe you just think about some of the things that are important to you and your family. Like, what do you hope to gain from a relationship with someone who helps you from our side of the fence? And those are things that you might want to jot down on a yellow pad or just have in your mind to ask as questions to get you an answer on if they can provide and come through with you with those benefits. And then clearly, look, if they're charging you for a financial plan, that's, there's ways to get around that, obviously, right? There's firms like ours that would do this for free for you as a way to get an introduction to you, to talk to you favorably about the services that we have to offer. So we don't charge people for that. So, and then of course, oh, by the way, this is a functional document. In other words, this is something that you can continue to update even beyond retirement to make sure you're still on track to meet these goals, which we do for our clients. You can reach us in a few manners. You can email us at info@theretirementgroup.com. You can call us at 800-900-5867. And if you wanted to, you can go ahead and take a picture of this QR code to the left, and you'll get access to a calendar, which you can schedule a 15 to 30-minute call with us to go over your specific circumstance. And we had showed you that LinkedIn page at the beginning. If you're not following us on LinkedIn, you should be, in my opinion. This is a great source for information that you might want to get a better understanding of. And most of our people that we've talked to value that the information that we put out on LinkedIn. So with that concludes what I had to talk about today. And I'm confident, or at least I hope, that we have some questions to address from the audience. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to come up with any finishing touches that we have on today's workshop, and then maybe address some questions if we have them. Mike?
Patrick, thank you. We do have several great questions, so let's dive right in. First question. I was craft for 11 years and then management for 12 years. I am 57 years old. Does the interest rate affect only part of my pension, or does it affect the whole thing?
Yeah, great question. Many of our folks have split service. For those of you who, started as non-management and then went into management, and if you spent enough time as a non-manager like this person has, you're going to end up with 2 buckets of pension dollars. The best part about this is that you do not have to take the same pension disbursement option on both plans. So in other words, it's possible to take the annuity on one plan and take the lump sum on the other, or take the annuity on both, or take the lump sum on both. And the question is related to if the interest rates affect both pools, and they do, assuming that you take the lump sum. So remember, the lump sum is affected by the interest rate environment. So all the things that we're talking about related to interest rates going up and affecting your lump sum deals with the lump sum only. So it's possible for you to take the annuity payment and this interest rate issue not have an impact on that number. So I hope that answered that question.
Thank you, sir. Next question. I am confused. Are you saying that if I go on Fidelity and enter today's rates, my lump sum is 15% lower? Is AT&T changing the formula?
So there's several questions here. And ironically, I had this issue with someone I spoke to from the company yesterday. They were going in and putting in different interest rates and still calculating a commencement for 2022, which is a problem. So understand that the rates that we're currently using for all applicable retirees in 2022 was effective November of 2021. So the calculator in Fidelity is already programmed to have that rate effective for the entire tax year. So as long as you put your retirement date in sometime in 2022, you do not need to put your segment rates or any changes in the interest rate environment because that's already factored in. So he was getting misreadings or different calculations when putting in different interest rates. And the interest rate impacts you going forward. So if you're going to try to compare a 2022 example to a 2023 example, then you would maybe want to put in different interest rates, which we can help you with, which we talked about, because those segment rates actually change every month. And we can kind of estimate, if you will, what the interest rates might do to your lump sum if you're considering the lump sum as an option. So going forward, the calculator and having a 15 to 20% reduction was for those folks who we anticipated comparing the difference between 2022 and 2023 or some date in the future.
Next question. Do I have to take my pension right after retirement? If I wait to commence my pension, will I then be forced to use next year's interest rates?
Yeah, great question. You are not required to enact your pension. You do not have to commence your benefits if you don't choose to do so. I guess the question would be, why would that be the best option for you? And more importantly, if you're considering taking the lump sum, the answer to this question is these rates do affect you. So you could postpone your decision, but each time you postpone your decision, each year, the new rates are going to impact that decision of what you will ultimately get, 2, 3, 5 years down the road or whatever the case may be. So the answer is you can defer your pension. There's nothing that says you have to commence immediately when you leave the payroll. But as an example, most of the folks that are considering leaving this year, the main reason is because they're losing the valuations of what's in their pension because of the interest rate increase. And so it would be counterproductive to leave the payroll with the intention, in this case, of trying to maximize your pool of capital in your pension, and yet just deferring your plan until next year, which would make you unfortunately have to use the rates that are increased, which would produce a lower lump sum for you.
Here's a great question, and I know we both get all the time. When is the last day to leave AT&T and still take advantage of the current interest rates?
Very good question. The answer is it depends. And it depends on your heritage, right? Basically, if you are a legacy T person, your last day on the payroll to get the 2022 interest rates can be no later than November 30th. And then you'd have an effective commencement date of the first day of the following month, and in this case would be December 1st. So your latest date as a legacy T person would be November 30. So you can retire anytime leading up to that, but your commencement date is the first of the following month. So as long as that first of the following month is no later than December, which can be no later than November 30 as the last day of work, then you're good for the 2022 rates. If you are a legacy S person, you can leave as late as December 30. For some of our non-managers who are in the Midwest and closer to the Northeast, you can actually commence and you can actually retire and commence on the same day, December 31st, and still get the 2022 rates, because some of those folks are even eligible to get a 7-week or 8-week vacation pay if they decide to leave on December 31st, which some of those folks will still be eligible to get the 2022 rates. But for most of our Legacy S people, December 30th is the last date, and then you'd have to commence on December 31st.
Thank you, sir. Next question. I want to leave, but not fully retire in 2024 when my kids
Okay.
get out of college. I am staying because no one will pay me what I make at AT&T. Are you suggesting it may make sense to leave this year and get another lower paying job now?
So, yeah, so this is a complicated question, right? Every single person is different. So there's no such thing as a blanket answer that says this is what you should do. But if you're in a position to have your retirement correlated to an anchoring event that I talked a little bit about earlier, college is over with, the house is paid for, the wife is going to retire at the same time, or your spouse, or whatever. These are called anchoring events, okay? If your retirement is correlated to an anchoring event, the question then is, if you weren't otherwise planning on retiring, if one of your main objectives is to maximize the pool of capital that you have on all fronts, 401k, pensions, any monies that you have invested, then you probably should consider to some level the difference between what would happen if you stayed or left the payroll prior to your actual anchoring event, or in this case, 2024 for the question. So if it makes sense, you might consider leaving AT&T to maximize the pool of capital in your pension. And yes, going to find a job, which may actually be a lesser paying job than AT&T would otherwise pay you, to help you get to that anchoring event for full retirement. So the good news is, if for some reason the new job that you were to consider is not paying you as much as you need to live on, you can actually still create income from your pension lump sum and your 401k monies and your outside investments, even if you're not 59 and a half in some cases, because there are exception rules that are eligible for those folks, depending on if we're pulling money from a 401k or an IRA. So I would encourage this person to watch our webinars that we've done on 72T planning, or premature distribution plannings, which you can get access to through the links that were dropped into the chat, as well as some of the workshops that we've done on value-based investing that talks about anchoring events, which is one of the behavioral characteristics of financial and retirement planning. And these things may have a better big picture thought for you to consider. But if you were a person who could meet your income needs by gaining a position somewhere else and leaving the payroll to effectively maximize the pool of capital that you have in your pension, then it might be best for you to consider that. Yes, absolutely. And one of the main things we can do to help provide that data, if you will, is a comparison between staying or leaving by running a cash flow analysis. So if you hadn't already done that, that would be my main recommendation, is to run a cash flow on the difference to understand if that's good or not good for you to do.
Okay. I have a financial planner with UBS, but I'm concerned with their lack of AT&T knowledge. I was let go from AT&T last November with over 34 years of service. Since I left a couple of times during my tenure, AT&T did not bridge my service. I have 2 pensions. Is it too late to take the lump sum? How will interest rates affect my payout?
Yeah, so this is unfortunate, right? This is what we talk about when we say it's good to have an advisor that understands the plan. So while UBS is a great company, and you may actually have a wonderful relationship with them, they didn't do you much service here by not advocating that you understand the difference between pulling or doing something with your pension when you actually left last year versus this year, because the transition absolutely cost you some money with respect to the interest rates and what your lump sum would be valued at. And the answer to your other question as part of that was yes, if you continue to postpone your disbursement, then you will continue to be subject to the new rates. So if you push your decision off past 2022, you're going to be impacted again. And if you consider taking the lump sum, which yes, is available to you as part of your question as well, you're going to have a lesser amount of money available to you. That's the bottom line.
Thank you. Another question. I am 52 with 35 years of service. Will there be penalties for retiring before 55?
Yeah, good question. They must have been one of our folks that started working through high school. We have a number of folks that I don't know. Some of you have been around long enough probably to know that AT&T used to have this cool program where if you wanted to work for the phone company, which was a big deal back then, they had a kind of a what's it called? Oh my goodness, I can't think of the benefit of working at the company, which you could do over the summer. It was like a summer program,
Internship.
An internship. Thank you. Goodness gracious. I couldn't think of that. But anyway, look, the answer to this particular question, right, where you're 35 years of service, if you're still on the payroll and you are not 55, okay, then in fact, you will have penalties on your pension plan. But the good news for you is your penalties will have been cut in half, because remember, you can be service pension eligible and still have penalties. And if you have more than 30 years of service, those penalties get cut in half. So they are 0.25% per month, or what equates to 3% per year for that individual.
And then finally, Patrick, what's the probability of AT&T canceling the lump sum option and only providing the annuity option?
So I'm not going to speculate on what my opinion is of the possibility of AT&T having an underfunded pension, but there is something that they're upheld to as a rule through the Pension Benefit Corporation, that if their pension plan is not 80% funded, that they have a right to be taken for the lump sum to be taken away from them. So I suppose the answer to the question is, yeah, there's some level of protection with respect to having the option to take the lump sum, obviously, but there is a risk, of course, of if they don't have a plan that's funded to the levels that the Pension Benefit Corporation requires, then there is a possibility of that option being removed from the plan. So I suppose there is a possibility, but I'm not going to speculate on what the percentage or probability of that is.
Well, that's it for questions. So again, Patrick and I want to thank you for joining us today. There were some great questions there, great information. We want to thank you. You can reach out to us again at info@theretirementgroup.com or give us a call at 1-800-900-5867. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, folks. Everyone stay safe. Take care.